Another day goes by and we don't know what the Pac-12 media deal is going to look like yet. We might not know for a while, but I don't think it's going to look that different from the current one.
Our Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. Remember that goal I talked about for you everydayers out there, 3,000 by the time the season starts. I think we can do it. I believe in us, and I am grateful to all of you. So we've talked about this streaming question before, and I don't think being on streaming is a huge deal. I know. I got to just kind of let that marinate out there. Make sure my position is very clear. Now, if it were a 100% streaming deal, which I do not expect for reasons I will discuss later in the show as well, that would be different. But I see a lot of concerns from people almost daily anytime streaming is brought up. You can't have 50% streaming. You got to be X amount on linear. You got to do this, that, and the other thing, right? And so Jim Williams, who's worked in the industry for a long time, wrote a piece in, I think it was Forbes, and talked about how he'd be surprised, or he expects that it'll be somewhere in the ballpark of 50% streaming. So what does that actually mean? That's the question we're answering today. What does it mean if 50% of the games in the next Pac-12 media deal were on streaming, Apple and or Amazon, and 50% were on cable, ESPN, Fox, Ion, CW? I don't know. We don't know at this point in time. They're talking about two of those entities later in the show. So I wanted to go through the numbers here. So the data goes like this. In 2022, there were 82 total games in which Pac-12 schools were playing football that were on broadcast linear television, in which the Pac-12 was responsible for the deal, in which it was a home or a neutral site, and that, whoever the home site is in college sports, they're responsible for determining where the game is going to be played. So when, Arizona State goes to play Oklahoma State this year, or I think they did that last year. Yeah, they did that last year. When they went to Stillwater and they played against Oklahoma State, the Big 12 media deal determined where that game was going to be broadcast. So last year, there were 82 games. There were 82 games, 82 home or neutral site games in which the Pac-12, the teams, the conference, whatever, were responsible for figuring out how it was going to get distributed to fans. Of those 82 games, how many do you think were on linear broadcast television? Since it's all the concern in the world, according to some of you out there, that 50% streaming is going to kill exposure and it's not enough and it's terrible and it's just this huge, massive step back from the previous deal and all that sort of stuff that I've been hearing for months now here on the show. How many do you think of those 82? I'll give you 3 seconds. Ready? 3, 2, 1, 45. 45. The other 37 were on the Pac-12 network, which to me is pretty darn similar to streaming. Because the concern that people have when they say Apple or Amazon or streaming is, well, you're not going to be able to get it to people. Well, that's kind of what the Pac-12 network is right now. You can't get it to as many people as you would like to. You have to be a paying member or part or whatever of a certain cable package, not all of them. And I think in many ways, a streaming service like Apple or Amazon is easier for people on the other side of the country to access than the Pac-12 network. So of the 82 in 2022, 45 of them, which is just over half, right? Half would be 41. So we're just ticking up over 50%. And yet people are making it out to seem like if it was a 50% streaming and 50% linear deal, it would be radically different. In 2023, there will be 80 games that the Pac-12 media deal is directly responsible for broadcasting. And again, you are going to have 45 of them on ESPN and Fox and 35 on the Pac-12 networks. So let's say, just as a hypothetical, because this is, to some people out there, a disaster scenario and a total just complete utter, it would kill their visibility and all this sort of stuff, and it'd be so much worse than before. If you had a 50-50 streaming deal and you've got 80 games to put on television in some capacity in the fall, you're talking about 5 games, not per team, across the entire conference that would go from linear cable to a streaming service. And the games, now, it's not entirely clear at this point in time what will happen with the Pac-12 network, but it seems to appear that if you're going to have a streaming partner involved, they would take the Pac-12 network content. So I don't think the next Pac-12 media deal is actually, in effect, going to be that different from the one that we have right now. Because currently, the way that things shake out is you've got a 45-35 split for the home football games of ESPN and Fox air 45 of them, and 35 are on the Pac-12 networks, which is not as accessible to a large audience, right? Linear cable is a lot easier to see there. In the next deal, if you had ESPN and one other cable partner, which I suspect is what George Kliavkoff is looking for right now, whether that's Ion, whether that's get Fox back to the table, whether that's the CW, whether that's someone we don't know about at this point in time. If you have 2 cable partners and a streaming partner who gets the rest of that content, and the rumblings as of late have been that Apple is kind of the leader in the clubhouse for being that major streaming partner, but nothing is a done deal and no one actually knows. It's just something I heard along the grapevine recently. Is that different than what we have right now? If you had instead of 45 games on linear and 35 on the Pac-12 network, you had 40 and 40, is that going to radically impact the conference? Is that going to radically impact whether or not recruits see you, whether or not you've got sufficient visibility, all that sort of stuff? My answer to that question is a resounding no. The way that we consume Pac-12 content right now, when it's a home game for the conference and they're responsible for the broadcasting rights for that individual school, or as I've explained, you either watch it on ESPN, you watch it on Fox or FS1, or you watch it on the Pac-12 network. 2 linear, 1, consider the Pac-12 a hybrid, whatever. If that then shifted to ESPN, and let's say just for fun, the CW over here and Amazon Prime or Apple over here, I don't see that big of a difference. And so I wanted to go through the numbers today because it seems to me that people have an outsized perception of what the current ratio of being on one of the traditional media partners actually is. So if you've got 80 games to air, right? You stay at 12 teams, you'll probably have somewhere in the ballpark of, high 70s, low 80s game. Let's just call it 80, make it an even number. If, and this is an if, that number is 50% streaming, you'd have 50% on ESPN or some other cable partner probably, and 50% on Apple or Amazon. And I just don't think that is that bad of a situation, or at the very least, I don't think it's that different of a situation from what we have right now. And I think in some ways you could argue it's better because the Pac-12 network, it's not as easy to access for a lot of people as it would be for Amazon. Anybody could sign up for Amazon. A lot of people have Amazon or Apple TV, whatever the case may be. But you can't just sign up for the Pac-12 network. You have to pay for it as a part of your cable package. But if you have DirecTV, then you don't have that, and so it's harder to watch and whatnot. So, a couple other notes on in the media space. A question about the CW that is most intriguing. It's kind of obvious, but also important to point out just in case we overlook it, which I kind of have to this point in my discussion of the CW. And another move on the Ion front, because let me tell you, they're doing something interesting, just like Bilt's doing something interesting on April 22nd. That be tomorrow as this show airs. I don't have all the details yet, but the excitement is real. and it's something you don't want to miss. If you know how Built works, you know they have the most incredible protein bars in the world. They do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors in limited quantity. So mark your calendars, head to Built on Saturday, April 22nd. Be one of the first to discover what all the hype is about. I can't wait to see what the new flavor is. I'm a mint brownie guy myself, but I love a bunch of other ones, especially the puffs that Built has. You can get 15% off your next order as well when you use promo code LOCKEDON15 at built.com. All right, a couple other things as we continue to speculate about our beloved media deal here, which doesn't exist yet, but that's what makes it fun, right? And if you ever have a thought, question, comment, concern, statement of outrage, YouTube comments, plenty of statements of outrage on there. Twitter at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. Drop a question or a thought, get it answered to discuss here on the show. I want to start with Ion Television, my personal favorite. My personal favorite, preferred, shall we say, secondary cable partner to the Pac-12 in addition to ESPN. Did you know what Ion Television did the other day? Do you know what they did? No? Okay, I'll inform you because that's kind of how this works. I say things, you listen, you opine, and then we go back and forth and try to, reach some sort of conclusion and such. So Ion Television the other day is now getting into the sports broadcasting space. How interesting. They signed a broadcast deal with the WNBA that runs alongside ESPN. How fascinating. Going through 2025. They'll be showing 15 Friday night WNBA games a year. Now, I look at this model and I say that's something that I could foresee the Pac-12 absolutely doing. Now, the question would be how much ESPN values those Thursday and Friday night Pac-12 after dark games, which are great content, by the way. Like, they're an excellent thing to put in that particular window. But I looked at this and thought, boy, I kind of am just seeing it's starting to come into focus for me what a deal could really look like here that involves a secondary cable partner like Ion Television. And I think this is notable for two reasons. Number one, Ion now has a relationship with ESPN, which, as we know, is one of the entities that has long been involved in the Pac-12 media rights talks. And they don't have the Big Ten anymore. I suspect they're going to be involved. Everybody else has said that as well. I think they want to stay in the college sports space. It's very much a big TV product and a big draw and whatnot. I don't think they want to, be removed from that after not being a part of the Big Ten deal, right? They'd rather be a part of the Big Ten deal. Of course, you'd rather have the Big Ten than the Pac-12, but you'd also probably rather have the Pac-12 than nothing if you're talking about being involved in the college sports landscape. So I look at that and say, okay, so now I see a sports broadcast partnership in which ESPN is the primary rights holder and Ion Television has a select number of games. So the framework is there, number one. Number two, now you're looking at Ion and saying, well, they're diving into the sports space, right? Why is Apple involved? Because they're starting to move in that direction. It started with the MLS, and then it moved into Friday night baseball games with Major League Baseball. Amazon, same sort of thing, right? You look at Thursday Night Football and you say, well, they're in the sports space. They're in this realm. They're trying to create an avenue to make that a part of their company. So I saw this headline from Ion and just thought, boy, maybe there'll be a player that now maybe I'm being optimistic because they show Criminal Minds and I love Criminal Minds. It's a fantastic show. And I'm just so very, very open to the idea. Every day is tired of me saying this, but you just got to deal with it at this point in time. You're stuck with me. That's what you got. I am so open to watching a Pac-12 game on Friday night. It ends at, I live in the southern part of the state of Utah, so ends at like 11:30, 12 or so, somewhere in that range. And then Criminal Minds as we drift off into a blissful sleep. I tell you what, that sounds like a good time. Sounds like a really good time. But I saw that note or saw that headline, wanted to bring it up because I thought it was pretty noteworthy given the negotiations here. So let's get to a question here that came in from Eric Lammerman about the CW. And basically, he's asking about the time zones and when you'd be able to play games on the CW. And there was another question about this as well from Tyler Trout via Twitter. Again, YouTube comments, Twitter at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac12. Get a question answered here on the show. Tyler asks, is the CW involved in addition to ESPN and Amazon/Apple or to replace someone? If it's in addition, is there any chance we get simulcasts of the CW on cable, but available on Prime also? Seems like two non-traditional partners working together makes sense, but it's not easy, of course. So this subleasing question has come up before. I think it's an option. If Apple were to have the winning bid as the primary streaming partner, they could, if they wanted to, sublease games to a cable entity that would be interested in airing the games, right? Like if Fox randomly decided, yeah, we want to air that game, like we want the Oregon-Washington game because it's the most viewed game in the Pac-12, but Apple under the contract, was able to get the rights to that, which would surprise me, but let's just say it happened. They could sublease the game. I don't think it would be simulcast on there. I think that's kind of a rarity nowadays, but it's not impossible that sort of partnership and coordination can happen there, is my understanding. But the original question that you asked there, Tyler, is the CW involved in addition to ESPN and Amazon or Apple or as a replacement? My thinking, and I think the way that it appears to be playing out and what people closer to the situation than myself are saying is that someone like the CW or Ion would be a secondary linear partner, right? So like I was talking about with Ion Television, right? They are getting these 15 games in the WNBA that'll air on Friday nights, and it's like Major League Baseball with Apple TVs. They're airing X amount of games on Apple, right? Major League Baseball's primary media partners are still ESPN, Fox, and then they have a bunch of regional television contracts as well with places like Root Sports. Shout out, I interned there when I was back in college. I interned at Root Sports Northwest. Got my Mariners shirt on today, as a matter of fact. So that's the way that it would appear to play out. To me, that makes the most sense. Because if you're looking at what the Pac-12 media deal is now, and go back to how I started the show, I don't think the next deal is going to look that different from the current one. The current one has ESPN as the primary media rights holder, where they have a greater percentage of the games, is I believe the case right now, but Fox is also involved. Now, if you have someone who's a non-traditional cable partner like Ion or the CW in there, then I think there's a pretty solid chance they wouldn't be quite as close to what Fox and ESPN were, and ESPN would probably have a greater share of the rights just because they're, more comfortable in that space, more familiar, and they're also probably the place the Pac-12 would like to have more of their games. But at the end of the day, it also come down to the almighty dollar, right? If, someone bucks up and pays top shelf for the rights to broadcast the games, and then the Pac-12 will probably go in that direction, especially if it's a cable partner. But Fox has been kind of in and out of the negotiating table based on reporting we've seen from people who are close to the situation. But if they were to remain out of it, I think what you'd have with the CW is they would be kind of the additional linear partner to ESPN. And then those would be your primary rights holders. And then you would have Apple and or Amazon involved in some capacity as well. But the upside that I talked about earlier on the show with the CW, that's kind of obvious, kind of not, but I think is worth discussing regardless, is you could play games in a time window that is much more accessible because you wouldn't have any competition. So here's what I mean. ESPN and Fox right now have the rights to Pac-12 football games, but they have the rights to other conferences as well. And when you turn on Fox at, I think it's noon East. Yeah, noon Eastern. Duh, it's big noon. Well, I just forgot the times. Anyway, big noon is the big game, right? So right when college game day ends, you go straight into that slew of games. And that is certainly a great way to get college football fans across the country, eyeballs on your conference, watching your teams, paying attention to your games is, at least for me personally, that's what I've always done. I love waking up on Saturday mornings if I don't have work to do. I watch game day, and then I flip through and I watch, the games that are on during that particular window. So the Pac-12, their deal with ESPN has got an agreement to always have a game in the late window, right? 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific time and such. And that, of course, changes across the country. 5:30 Mountain, 6:30 Central. Now we all understand how time zone works. Yay. Anyway, so if you were on the CW, you wouldn't have to compete with other conferences who networks also have the rights to put them in a time slot that you view as more desirable, right? So like Washington, for instance, I think Husky fans felt that they played too many late night games in 2022 and that not as many people saw them. And that's why the Michael Penix Heisman campaign didn't take off. I think the ASU loss was a part of that, but certainly it was way undersold. Like the nation's leading passer on an 11-win team. Yeah, it should have gotten more buzz. He won't fly under the radar again for another year, but I think Washington was playing a lot of late night games. And as one of your biggest television draws, especially going forward, that's not what the conference should be trying to do in that sense. So if you're on the CW or if you're on Ion Television, you are not restricted to the windows that tend to be later in the day, because those windows are more available because of how, again, how time zones work. The Pac-12 provides inherent value as a conference on that front because you can put games later in the day. And ESPN and other networks are looking for games to put in that particular time slot. Now, if you have a big game, Oregon, Utah, or Oregon, USC over the years, or, Washington and USC this year will be a really big game. Like that's the sort of game that you'd want to put in prime time, right? But the other games, right, that you wouldn't consider the creme de la creme of matchups between Pac-12 teams, if they're on a secondary linear partner like Ion or the CW, you could put it right at 12 o'clock Eastern time, right when college game day ends and all the other games are kicking off. But Pac-12 football doesn't start at that time. Now, you may run into a hurdle there with teams not wanting to get up early and play that early in the day. But at the very least, the game that caught me, I think, most off guard and just felt kind of random last year was Oregon State and Arizona State. It was late in the year. ASU had already fired Herm Edwards. They were bad. Oregon State was playing well. Beavs went into Tempe and trounced them. Game was on ESPN2, started at, I think, 11, I want to say 12:30 or so, like 12:30 local time. I think if you're on a linear channel that is not one of the traditional cable partners, you're not competing with the other conferences, which is, we know the Pac-12 doesn't always stack up as well as we would like them to compared to the Big Ten or the SEC. So the likelihood that they could play in that window, I think, is more plentiful. The opportunities are more plentiful if you're not working with ESPN or Fox or that, right? Like if Ion or the CW were to have rights to Pac-12 games, they're going to put them in the best possible time slot they can. They don't need to stash them, later in the day or have them wait around and whatnot. They could put them right, early in the morning. I don't know if schools would go for, a 9 a.m. local time kickoff. That's pretty unlikely, but I think you could have more times because look at the Pac-12 network. Pac-12 network games start at, 11 every now and then, but you'll have 12, 1, and 2. If those games were on some form of linear television, I think that could be better than what you have right now, just in terms of getting on people's TVs early in the day, because not everyone sits in front of their television and watches college football for 7 hours. That's what I do on Saturdays in the fall. That's what a lot of you do. That's what my everydayers out there do. But not everybody does that. So I think that is an interesting discussion. Again, drop your comments below. I'm curious as to what you guys think about that sort of stuff. But I think there's real upside there. Okay, I want to close with this real quick. Been so caught up in the media stuff. Spring football coverage has been fleeting at times here on the show. But trying to get into that, there are a few more spring games this weekend. If you got questions about them, by all means, shoot me a note and I'll go into it here on the show. Oregon State and Colorado and someone else have got their spring games on Saturday, April 22nd, when Built Bar's dropping that new flavor, by the way. So we'll try to talk about those a bit next week, unless there's some media rights news and whatnot. But something that I kind of overlooked last week. It's not surprising, Weren't really any people there, and it was on Pac-12 Network, and it's Cal. But I was watching some highlights of the Cal spring game. Now, look, I'm not particularly high on the Bears coming into this year, but number one, their new offensive coordinator, former Texas State head coach Jake Spavital, he's clearly revamped the offense and is being given control there. That's an encouraging sign if you're a Bears fan. Number two, go watch the first play of that game. Go watch the throw that Sam Jackson makes and tell me the last time you saw a Cal quarterback who could do that, because the answer to me is Jared Goff. And that's when Cal was at least relevant, interesting, winning football games, able to be competitive. Not at a championship level in the conference. They haven't done that really ever. They're one of just 3 programs to never reach a Pac-12 football championship game. Oregon State and Washington State are the others. But I'm just telling you, I watched that throw and I saw the way the offense looked, and I thought, you know what? Maybe they will finally have what they've never had in the Justin Wilcox era, some explosiveness at quarterback. Because I tell you, he was a 4-star guy coming out of high school. He had Pac-12 offers. Oregon was after him. Of course, TCU is where he ended up. Now he transfers over to Cal. He doesn't have a ton of experience. I think he looks a little jittery in the pocket at times, but he's a tremendous athlete, and he's got a real arm. He's got a lively arm there. And look, am I saying this to lay the groundwork for Cal being the surprise dark horse team in the Pac-12 this year? No, I don't find that to be the case at all. But what Cal can do, number one, I could see them getting bowl eligible this year. I could see it. If the offense can improve, the defense has got a really steady floor and a pretty solid ceiling year in and year out with Wilcox at the helm. And if Sam Jackson comes in and starts to be the sort of guy who makes the plays that were just not featured very often in the Cal offense last year, and he brings a mobile element that they really haven't had. Chase Garbers was mobile, but they didn't really use him in that sense. Cal could be a team that wins one of those games that makes you go, it's so Pac-12 to just cannibalize itself, isn't it? It's so Pac-12 that would happen, right? In 2022, that was Arizona State beating Washington. You look back in retrospect and say, wow, with the way everything played out, it kept Washington from the Pac-12 championship game and therefore a shot at the college football playoff. Arizona, think Arizona last year. Who did they beat? UCLA. What did that influence? Who's getting to the Pac-12 championship game? I'm just saying, I would not rule it out. And look, it's a limited sample size, just a spring game, but that's something that Cal did not have last year. Is an explosive playmaker at quarterback. And if Sam Jackson really taps into that potential this year, I'd watch for the Bears to pick an upset. All right, that's it for today. See you all next weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate everyone listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.